Hello, I'm Kelly McCullen. UNC-TV and the North Carolina Bar Association are partnering to give you an opportunity to hear firsthand from candidates seeking judicial offices in North Carolina. Judicial races are very important. They are often overlooked in the national conscious, except maybe Supreme Court Chief Justice, and in this case, North Carolina's race for Chief Justice. We'll spend the next half hour learning about and hearing from Democratic incumbent Chief Justice Cheri Beasley and Senior Associate Justice and Republican challenger Paul Newby. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thanks for having us, Kelly.
First question by coin flip to you is the easy one that sets the table. High profile race. Who are you, Chief Justice?
Well, I'm Cheri Beasley, and I am the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and have served for a little over a year and a half. I've served on the Supreme Court of North Carolina for about 7 years, the North Carolina Court of Appeals for 4 years, and I was a district court judge in Fayetteville, Cumberland County for 10 years, presiding at all of our courts, families, juvenile, civil, criminal, and traffic. And so I've got about 21 years of judicial experience.
Mr. Newby, tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm the Senior Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. That means I'm the longest serving of any of the justices, first elected in 2004. 16 years of experience. I've been a lawyer for 40 years. I grew up in a little town, Jamestown, between High Point and Greensboro. Mom was a school teacher, Dad just an hourly worker, and no lawyers in our family. I met the first lawyer as a Boy Scout going through getting my Eagle Scout. He encouraged me to think about the law. I jokingly say the only 4 years I ever spent out of state were the 4 years I went to Duke. But during that time, I had the opportunity to work at the U.S. Supreme Court for the Chief Justice. It gave me a great appreciation for our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, our Constitution. I decided I wanted to stay in North Carolina, so I went to UNC Law School, where I met my wonderful wife, Macon. I then was in private practice. I was in-house counsel, and for about almost 20 years, I was an assistant United States attorney, doing both civil and criminal litigation. In 2004, an open seat on the Supreme Court. When Bob Orr resigned, became available, and I ran as a nobody and was fortunate enough to win. So I've been on the court for 16 years.
How do you view the role of Chief Justice of North Carolina Supreme Court?
That role, and it's set up by our state constitution, that role, first and foremost, is the head of the 7 justices who comprise the North Carolina Supreme Court. That justice helps schedule the cases and then presides over the court as we have court and people bring their cases to the highest court in our state. Also, the Chief Justice is the head of the judicial branch, which has 6,500 employees across the state, many of whom are constitutional officers, whether it's clerks or superior court judges. These folks are also, their offices are set up by our state constitution. So there's a lot of influence. There's a lot of trying to influence using that position to ensure that our system provides equal rights for every person.
Chief Justice Beasley, how do you see the role of Chief Justice now that you've been in the position?
You know, I would agree with Justice Newby in some part, but the other piece of this is when I became the Chief Justice, North Carolina had just experienced Hurricane Florence. There were many coastal communities that were greatly damaged. We had courthouses in that area that were closed, and certainly many court employees who continue to experience some repercussions and damage from that period of time. And so it was important for me as the Chief Justice to lead and to make sure that those court facilities had what they needed, that the court employees had the resources that they needed. Certainly since I've been the Chief Justice, I have led the Supreme Court of North Carolina, and I've also led the judicial branch of government. But we also find ourselves in the midst of this pandemic, and none of us could have predicted that we in North Carolina and the nation and the world would be in this place. And so the impact of the pandemic has really required leadership differently from the Chief Justice. I have had to make sure that we were being as safe as possible in holding courts. We're holding a lot of virtual courts and modifying the number of cases that we're hearing so that we can institute proper public safety, health and welfare requirements. And it's also been really important to me to lead through heightened racial tensions. So we're in a place in North Carolina that we've never seen in modern times. And so I think everybody would say that the role of Chief Justice really has required a whole lot more.
Dive a little deeper into the management style of the Chief Justice. What are your leadership skills that you bring? Because it's such a big title. It's so important from a court standpoint. But working with the people at the court level, what do they need to see in a leader?
Well, I think they need to see support. They need to see support from the Chief Justice. These are trying times, and we are all leaders in our courts. The court employees are certainly working very, very hard to work through this pandemic and the impact on our courts. And they need to feel a sense of support. We are working with fewer resources right now, and everybody is sort of feeling the weight of the pandemic, not just professionally, but personally. We're all members of our respective communities, and so I think it's important for the Chief Justice to offer resources, to offer support, to offer leadership. I've appointed a COVID-19 task force to give us guidance around how it is we should resume increasing the access to our courts, as well as resuming jury trials. And so those recommendations have been hugely helpful. So for me, it's been important as a part of my leadership to also seek input from court leaders. These are the folks who are working very hard every single day in our courts to hear cases in a timely fashion. And so to have their input and for them to receive the support and leadership from me, I think has been hugely important.
Justice Newby, what kind of leader would you be? You both have very impressive resumes, but the human element of this. Who are you when they come in and it's Chief Justice Newby?
The people that you want to lead have to have extreme confidence that you understand what the issues are and that you are ready to address and, frankly, ready to equip them to address whatever the problems may be. Justice delayed is justice denied. You know, our judicial system is different than the legislative, different than the executive. It's important for us to have a place where people can come in, have their disputes resolved in a very timely manner. I believe in collaboration. And because of my unique background in terms of I've practiced law in just about every area you can imagine, I'm able to speak the language of the lawyers and the judges that come before us or come into a collaborative situation. But I believe in local control. I don't think Raleigh ought to dictate to the 100 counties out there the way that they need to be reacting. We have jury trials in the federal system. I think that local folks, local clerks, local superior court judges, district court judges should determine what's safe for themselves, because our justice system shouldn't be relegated to kind of a lower importance. It's vital that our courts be open because, as I said, justice delayed is justice denied, whether it's a criminal perspective or from the civil perspective. You know, the courts of justice need to be open for business. Our state constitution says that. The courts are always to be open. So I think we have to proceed with helping the local folks understand what the challenges are, but then let them make the decisions that are best in each locality.
Are judges in Raleigh dictating to all 100 counties, since you seem to mention that in your last answer?
Well, yes, that is going on. And that, I think, should be troubling to the folks across the state, because I do believe that the people in the western part of the state, the eastern part of the state, that they have their own unique situations. Every courthouse is different. Every clerk's office, the way that the judges, superior court, district court judges react, and they should be given the responsibility to figure out what's best for them and then to proceed. I believe folks take very seriously the pandemic that's going on, and they will make the right choices, but keep it in mind that delaying jury trials just creates a backlog that also creates serious problems with regard to our criminal justice system, where you have Speedy Trial Act, as well as the civil system, where there's so many issues that need to be resolved.
Chief Justice Beasley, do you have any comments on that, about the voice from Raleigh being dictatorial to all 100 counties?
Well, the voice from Raleigh would be the voice from the Chief Justice, and I have indeed entered emergency directives to try to keep our court employees and our court leaders and judges and district attorneys safe. I never ever ordered that our courts would be closed. In fact, our courts have remained open since we were aware of this pandemic in March. We have greatly reduced the access to our courts and did through June the 1st, where we began to expand the access to our courts. But even during that time, and even today, many of the hearings are occurring either live or virtually. Where appropriate, some of those hearings are occurring telephonically. And the feedback that I've received from judges and lawyers and a host of folks around the state is that they're actually very pleased. None of the authority has been removed, and that's not even really possible from local judges. They certainly have the authority. What we're trying to do is to make sure that folks can proceed safely. I think often we take for granted that when we see a court facility like the Wake County courthouses, which have lots of space, that we can think about holding jury trials, observing social distancing and other safety measures. But many court facilities are much smaller. And so some of these locations are having to use alternate locations and secure them, which also means you've got to have security from local law enforcement and a host of other considerations that have to be made. Those senior resident Superior Court judges all over the state are submitting their plans to the Administrative Office of the Courts. And all of us are making collective decisions around how to go forward in resuming jury trials. We will do this safely. The studies show us that people who we would call in for jury selection, who we call the venire, are reluctant to come in. Many of those folks are immunocompromised and have other considerations they'd have to think about, or they may live with someone who's immunocompromised. So we certainly don't want to call people in for jury duty when they're not comfortable being there. That's what the studies show us. And frankly, a lot of lawyers are saying to us, and I speak with lawyers all day, every day, we want to make sure that we do this right and we do it safely. And they too, I mean, many of them are older and also immunocompromised, and they are reluctant to go into court and to be there for an extended period of time to select a jury and then to sit through a jury. You know, when you pick a jury, there are 12 people who sit in a box, close, shoulder to shoulder, and we want to make sure that when we resume, we're not in some way putting them in danger. So there are a host of considerations, and I'm very thankful that the local judges and district attorneys and public defenders and sheriffs and public health officials, all of whom have had to sign on to the jury resumption plans, have been very engaged in thinking about how best to do that safely in each individual judicial district. So we're not doing a holistic plan for the entire state.
The segue to that is being the spokesperson of the court. You're the forward-facing person. Tell me about balancing the role of making decisions like that, being the person who has to put their name behind those decisions. How does that differ from being a presiding judge hearing a case?
Well, it's different because I have to, of course, make decisions and considerations that impact several judicial districts. I mean, we're talking about a whole state that's been impacted. And we have had folks who have been in our courts who've contracted COVID-19. We've had to temporarily close courthouses to make sure that we're sanitizing, to be safe. So there really are a host of considerations. What we don't want to do is to rush and not make every single consideration around resuming jury trials and in other ways that we're proceeding in cases in our courts. As a local presiding judge, they certainly have all the authority. In fact, most of them have, even as I have entered emergency directives, and I continue to do that, are entering their own local administrative orders that are consistent with mine. And my orders have been designed such that they're broad enough so that the local senior resident Superior Court judges and local chief district court judges can enter their own orders, which really do tailor to the uniqueness of those locales. So this seems to be working out pretty well so far.
Your thoughts, Justice Newby, on the use of executive orders, judicial orders from the bench. Do you have a problem with that? How should that tool be wielded during a pandemic or any other type of crisis in North Carolina?
Yes, I think from a constitutional perspective, okay, you've got to look at the roles that the Constitution has given each of the judicial officials. With all due respect, the information that I hear from judges and lawyers from across the state is that they are very concerned that the courthouses are not operating, the local courthouses are not operating at the capacity that they believe they could be operated. So, you know, it seems to them that there's a centralized, even the submission of plans to the administrative office of the courts, they have expressed to me, is upside down. The administrative office of the courts should be there to help them, not to tell them or to approve or disapprove whatever local plan they may have. So to me, and again, if your question addresses orders from a sitting Chief Justice, then I do think from a constitutional perspective, there's some real questions with regard to that authority. But with regard to the actual work of our court, which is to write opinions, to decide cases and issue opinions, I think that's equally as important as the Chief Justice would lead the 7 justices, the other 6 on our court. So to me, it seems like, yes, on the one hand, the Chief Justice needs to be leading, needs to be helping the local folks understand what the challenges are. But on the other hand, you can't forget that our primary function is to decide cases that come before us.
How much of a distraction has that been? COVID does affect court operations, obviously sparks an intellectual debate over the use of judicial orders and your style of management and keeping the courts safe, if at reduced capacity. You can't see COVID coming. Were you ready when it came?
I'm not sure anybody was really ready for COVID. I think what was important was that we took a measured, thoughtful approach to how best to address it. And yes, it is very important for the Chief Justice to lead the Supreme Court and to write opinions and decide cases. You know, and we do hold court. We've been holding court virtually recently. And so all of that still happens. But we're living in a pandemic, and these local areas have needs. And so it has been responsible for me as the Chief Justice and for the Administrative Office of the Courts to be responsive to local districts and be responsive to their needs. And so we've been doing that.
Do you see if this passes, say we get a vaccine in January, let's hope. Are the courts behind or just moving slower? Will services be restored, in your opinion, very quickly if we could get a vaccine and restore confidence in society?
You know, we do have a backlog. I mean, we have needed to sort of de-accelerate the pace at which we were hearing cases. I mean, it's not uncommon on a normal day for there to be 1,000 people on a docket in a large courtroom in a place like Wake County. So we couldn't do that, and we certainly couldn't do that very safely.
How do you handle that backlog? I'm sorry. Keep going.
Well, I was just going to say, I too hope that there's a vaccine and that it's effective and that we can move forward. We're making those assessments literally week by week. And in the very same way that the governor and the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the CDC are putting out information to help us make informed decisions about how to go forward, and we're consulting with all of them to make sure that we're doing the very best to keep folks safe on the one hand and balancing that safety with being able to hear as many cases as possible. But we are thinking about ways as well as to how to deal with the backlog, because we do have one. We have thought about a whole host of ways to include bringing in some temporary employees. We have some folks who work for our courts whose services we value, who are immunocompromised, and so they can't come into courthouses every day like they had been. If they can work from home, then that works out well, but some of them really can't. And so we are also feeling a shortage of people who are actually able to come to work because they have some sort of physical condition that will prohibit them from doing that.
Justice Newby, Easy to complain about policy from the Chief Justice role. I get that. We're running for office here, or you're running for office here. But how do you handle that backlog if you inherit the job and win that job?
Well, first off, I want to say that in 2011, we had the swine flu. We also had, of course, the terrorism threat that was ongoing. And each of the local areas came up with a pandemic plan. And it's my understanding that no one has really tapped into all those plans. I know we as the Supreme Court actually developed our own plan for what are we going to do. So we as the Supreme Court are addressing things through WebEx. And frankly, it's not the same as having an in-person argument in front of the court.
WebEx is what, Zoom?
Zoom.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it's a Zoom. And so, you know, when I look at our Constitution, that the courts are always going to be open, are we ready to say due process, equal protection is covered by a virtual hearing as opposed to a face-to-face? We gave the parties an opportunity in May to voluntarily say, yeah, we want to do a virtual. Nobody took us up on it. So I just think so much of communication occurs face-to-face and through other things. Now, with regard to the backlog that you specifically asked about, it is a big concern. We had a backlog in some criminal cases already. We were getting speedy trial motions before the court. My goodness, what are we going to do now? It looks to me that the DAs are going to have to dismiss some cases. Maybe they're going to have to sort through, kind of find, if you will, the worst of the worst. We're still going to get speedy trial motions. What will the court say? What does the Constitution require with regard to the rights of, you know, the criminal defendants? And what about all these victims? I mean, the justice system is there to address the wrong that's been done to them, and they've been waiting and waiting. So in terms of the specifics of how do we address that, yeah, we're going to have to go to the General Assembly. You're going to have to ask the General Assembly for funding. You're going to have to bring in emergency and retired judges. You're going to have to all hands on deck. Justice delayed is justice denied. We're going to have to address that.
That concludes the questioning phase of this. Part of the agreement for this conversation was each of you would have a 2-minute closing statement. We'll start with you, Chief Justice Beasley. 2 minutes to, I'm going to say make your case to the voters, but you have the camera.
Thank you. I would say that we really do have a pandemic plan, and we're using the one that was instituted before. What we're doing is constitutional and statutorily grounded. I'm excited about the opportunity to continue in service as Chief Justice. You've heard a fraction of what we do in my work. I lead the Supreme Court of North Carolina, but I also lead the judicial branch of government. And that also means addressing a whole host of other issues. This pandemic is creating a whole lot of issues around the impact of COVID-19 on our communities, which means that we're addressing domestic violence differently because we know that those numbers are up during this pandemic. We're addressing substance abuse differently because we know those numbers are up during this pandemic. We're addressing child abuse differently because those numbers are up during this pandemic. We're excited about the fact that we can offer people who have their driver's licenses revoked. And we have a population of roughly 10 million, 9th most populous state in the nation, roughly over a million people who have their driver's licenses revoked, not because they have in some way committed a crime, but because they couldn't pay the fine and fees. So when we think about all the kinds of ways in which we can help people through our Faith and Justice Alliance, where we're partnering with faith communities and organizations around the state to help folks with legal issues, a COVID-19 small business and nonprofit initiative to help folks who are facing problems through this era. Second chances for juveniles who before raised the age passed, offering those folks expungements because they don't fall under the new law. We are working so hard. So I think it's important for the Chief Justice, yes, to lead the Supreme Court of North Carolina, and she also leads the judicial branch of government. But there are so many other issues facing communities and people who use our courts every single day. So I'm thoughtful about leading courageously, understanding that the role really can't be confined in a way that we're not serving people. That's our role. And it's my job as the Chief Justice to not be afraid to lead. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be in service. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be here today. And thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Chief Justice Beasley. Justice Newby, the last word is yours, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for watching, being better informed about the judicial elections. I've served on the court for 16 years, and during that 16 years, I have upheld the rule of law. What is the rule of law? What's important about our justice system? The rule of law means everybody's treated the same: rich, poor, powerful, not powerful. The symbol of justice is Lady Justice. She's blindfolded. She can't see who comes before her. She treats everyone the same. Who protects our fundamental rights and freedoms? The right to life and liberty and pursuit of happiness. It's up to the courts to protect those rights. It's up to those of us who understand that the rule of law is vital for public trust and confidence in our system, for everyone to be treated the same. In a civil cases, for those cases to quickly come before the court, the same with criminal cases where victims of crime deserve their justice, the innocent deserve to be protected, and yes, the guilty found guilty and properly punished. During my time on the court the last 16 years and even before that, I believe in civic education, going around to school groups and other groups, talking about the role of the judiciary, the fact that there are three branches of government, each with its own lane. It's important to have justices who appreciate judicial self-restraint, who keep the judicial branch right in the judicial lane. I've had the opportunities of speaking with judges from around the world about our legal system and the rule of law. Are we perfect? Of course not. We don't have perfect judges, perfect lawyers, perfect jurors. None of us are perfect. But yes, a fair trial free from prejudicial error is what everybody deserves. I've had the opportunity to work with scouting groups. And yes, as I was Assistant United States Attorney, I got to be involved, or I led the undercover sting operation that recovered North Carolina's original copy of the Bill of Rights that was stolen in 1865. I've had 40 years as a lawyer, 16 years on the court. I believe that experience is vital for the leadership that I would bring to the position of Chief Justice. I ask for your support, for your vote. You can find more about Paul Newby at paulnewby.com. Thank you.
And thank you. That concludes our conversation with the candidates for Chief Justice of North Carolina Supreme Court. Don't forget to vote, folks, and thank you for watching us here on UNC-TV. Bye-bye.